meet him on many of those days. So
wow.
Yeah.
I'll be with you in spirit
to do that. Yeah.
That's awesome. Looks like we got our Facebook friends coming in. I always like to see the streaming on Facebook. I feel like there's like this big virtual universe that all of a sudden joins us.
Okay, we are live on Facebook, and I'm going to let everyone in. Here we go.
Thank you, Earl.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm excited. Oh, welcome, friends. This is awesome. Seeing everybody come in. It feels like we just put open the front doors to the house and people are streaming in.
Come on in.
This is great. Hey.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
All right. I know you and John will be glad when this campaign is over with, huh?
Yeah.
I think you filled your punch card, David. you made it to all three.
Good to see you, David.
Good seeing both of you guys.
Absolutely. Well, it's great to see everyone joining us both on Facebook and live here in the town hall. It's a wonderful night. I wish this was in person, but it's great that folks are making time in their virtual lives to join us. Some good issues are going to get talked about tonight.
April, we are officially open for business. Everybody's
Awesome.
in. I'm sure people will show up, but I'll let them in as they come.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Well, welcome, friends. It's great to see everyone. And I think we will, since it sounds like everyone's been admitted and folks will be joining us both on Facebook and kind of in our virtual real lives, I'll just hand it over to Catherine to go over some ground rules. Unless, actually, John, did you want to say hi to everyone? I like, I feel like my little screen here. Or Representative Lovick, did you want to say hi to everyone?
I do. I just want to say hi briefly, and then I want to just take a minute to say something about Catherine. What a great job she did last night. I'm telling you, the lady is quite talented. We had a meeting with the ARC of Snohomish, and she was just on point all the way. Really appreciate listening to you. Wonderful lady.
Oh, John, that was so sweet. I was not expecting that shout out. So thank you.
No, great shout out. You did a great job.
Aw.
So much. Well, hi everyone. I'm Catherine. I'm April's campaign manager, and welcome to our Lake Stevens Town Hall. I'm really excited to see so many faces on this call. Some faceless people, but I know that they're out there. And so, yeah, I just want to go over some of our tech rules for the evening. So it seems like mostly everyone is already doing this, but if you could just keep your mics muted during the call to minimize any background noise, that would be awesome. And so the three main topics that we're going to discuss tonight are going to be education, transportation, and housing. But I really just, and so we have some pre-prepared questions regarding those topics, but I really just want to emphasize the fact that this is a town hall, which means that April and Representative Lovick want to hear from all of you about the issues that are most important to you. So if you have any questions that either fall into those three categories or any questions that don't fall into the categories that we're covering, please feel free to message them in the chat. And it would be easiest if you could put the theme of the question in all caps and then write your question. So maybe it's healthcare or the environment. And then we just know when to bring the questions in at the appropriate time. So that's really all that I've got for all of you. I'm sure that this is going to be an awesome discussion. So I'll just hand it back to Representative Lovick to introduce our moderator for this evening. And it seems as though Representative Lovick is muted.
You guys tell me to mute it, I mute it. I'm here to tell you. I don't mess around. We're all learning this technology. Thank you, Catherine, again. And again, one more shout out for last night. But I just want to take a moment to say just a few brief remarks about the moderator, John Spencer. I will tell you this. I've been in this county for many, many years, and you get to work with elected officials, particularly those who serve as mayors. And I don't know that I have ever worked with a kinder gentleman in my life. 2 years, actually a year ago, we had a town hall meeting in Lake Stevens, and he stood there. It was for Representative Delbaney, and he stood there. He moderated the meeting. He made sure that people were there. But what was neat about what he did, and this was during those kind of difficult times when we weren't sure what was going to happen, he took the time to have some of the our professionals, our police officers come up, and they stood by just to make sure that we didn't have any problems, but it was just kind of him to take the time to do that. So without further ado, and I just want to thank you for your friendship. I just want to introduce the moderator, former Mayor John Spencer, one of the kindest gentlemen I've ever met in my life. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thank you, John. Well, I appreciate that very much. I think we want to get on with our event tonight. We know that there's some other competing events, so people are really wanting to hear from both April and you, John, on the three topics. So I thought what we would do to get started here is ask each of you to address, to start out with the education topic, and give us some of your thoughts on that. What we know, and I think everybody is experiencing one way or another, whether they have children or grandchildren or are involved in the education field, is that this is a difficult time, and families are having to make a lot of difficult choices about how their children are going to be educated at home, or sometimes partly in the school, sometimes at home, how they're going to handle the care for their children when they're able to get back to work, and so on. So it's a difficult time. And I think a lot of families are worried about are my children going to get the quality education they needed? Are they're not going to fall behind and a year from now or 2 years from now, whenever, discover that they have a lot of work to do to make that up. So, and that's hard for everyday parents to be able to measure, are we making progress as we should be? So I think with that, I'll just turn it over to April to get it started, and then make a few comments, and then John, and then we won't try to burn up too much time on this topic, and then look for questions, so we'll come back on it. So April, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I would. Thank you for that, John. And I my heart goes out to everyone right now who families that are in the midst of this pandemic and trying to make some really tough educational decisions for their kiddos. I'll tell you, as a school board director, I've told many of you, my daughter's high school was the first in the country to have a COVID positive student. So as a leader, I was one of the first people in the nation to have to make some really, really tough decisions about education and how to deal with education during a pandemic. So, first we take care of the basics, right? We make sure our kiddos are fed. We make sure they have the technology they need to learn at home. And we made sure that we were doing community partnerships with Boys and Girls Club and YMCA so that they could have childcare for first responders and frontline workers. That said, you fast forward 7 months, and unfortunately, we're still in the situation of doing remote learning, but we're doing it better. And I'll tell you, from the Everett School District point of view, and I know this is the same for many of them, our families are happy that we took some lessons learned from the spring and brought it into the fall, so things are a little bit smoother. But it's that advocacy for parents understanding the need for continuous learning that I'm going to bring with me to Olympia, because it doesn't stop. We need to have the right amount of funds and the right amount of care given to our students and our families during this pandemic. The last piece I want to kind of talk about is that is the social emotional well-being, because John, you kind of touched on it, right? Like families are worried about gaps in learning and gaps in what's it going to look like when they come back in next fall when we get back to normal. But really, we need to figure out what we're going to do about the social emotional well-being of our kids right now so that they're whole when they come back in the fall, not just in terms of reading, writing, arithmetic, but in terms of their social emotional well-being. And so all of the districts, Lake Stevens, Snohomish, Everett, we're all looking at the social emotional whole child when we're talking about taking care of our kids during this pandemic. It's not easy, but we're doing it together. You have an amazing school district in Lake Stevens. Yeah, you guys, I know, have dealt with some recent tragedies there. And so my heart and I've been praying for the district and for the board. And they're actually meeting tonight. And so, you have a fantastic district, but I'll tell you, as a legislator, I'll be advocating and working with them to keep kids and families whole.
Thank you.
And thank
John,
you.
Go ahead,
I
John.
can't add anything to that other than to say that the thing that we don't want to do, Mayor, is we don't want to open schools and open too fast like they did in Florida and say Georgia, where we have to open the schools and kids go in and get infected and then infect other people. I think we're doing it the right way. We're following the science. But the number one thing I want us to remember is that when we go back to Olympia, when April and I are there, we need to sit shoulder to shoulder and make sure that as people are talking about cuts, that we do not cut education. Those are the things that we absolutely cannot do. We spent many years working on the McCleary fix to put over $8 billion in, and we can't go back from from the things that we've done so far. So I just want to underscore everything that April said. And I tell people, always wear a mask. I will be delivering masks. Jared Mead and I will be delivering masks to the Lake Stevens School District tomorrow, and Snohomish School District, and also the Everett School District, to try and help them whenever kids are back in school. Thank you.
And can I just add something? Can I
yeah.
add something to that really quick, John? Because I know we've done a couple of these town halls, and I've been calling voters and talking with them. One thing that keeps coming up that's on a lot of folks' mind is technology. And so, we've relied a lot on technology during this pandemic. And so, will that still be the case, right? Like when we get back to normal, what's going to happen with technology? Are these hotspots and internet access going to be taken away from these families? And so one thing I want to do and partner with Representative Lovick on this in Olympia is really making broadband an essential utility. We know now that it's not a luxury anymore. We've got to have broadband everywhere to everyone. And it's not just for our kids, but also as I speak with the seniors in our community, they're really going through some serious isolation issues if they don't have the right broadband and broadband services to connect with their loved ones during this pandemic. So that's one piece I don't want to forget about, is the technology piece, that we have to continue it after this public health crisis is over.
A great point, April. And I just want to say, I was with some educators earlier today over in Snohomish, and we need to make sure that we continue to support them in the great work that they do, not just the teachers, but also the other staff members. So those are things that we have to continue to do. So great comments.
What your thoughts on funding, I think, in broadband, certainly touches a lot of areas. I think one of the concerns that it's easy to overlook, and I'd like to hear from both of you on this, is those families that don't even, it's not a question whether they have broadband, they don't even have a computer or a connection, or the parent doesn't have any idea how to get them connected in. How do you see trying to leave, other than just leaving it to the school district, how do you see the legislature helping out in that arena?
I will tell you, John, and then I'll let April go. Those conversations are actually taking place now. We meet, we have a technology group. I'm not on that group, but they're having those conversations now. I don't know what we're going to end up with. This is something new for all of us. We're all learning, but I'm hearing from a lot of parents. I'm hearing from school districts, not just our local school district, but districts in other areas, as I'm making phone calls during the day. This broadband issue is something that we know as the legislature we need to address. We need to address it not just locally, but nationally. We need to get on top of this.
April?
Absolutely. And I would agree. And I think for me, coming from kind of that private sector point of view, is that we've got to work with our private sector employers on this, right? We've got to get in partnership because it's a win-win solution. There's a reason why Microsoft and Amazon started here, right? And we can probably trace that lineage back to Boeing and just some of the educational and technology kind of infrastructure foundation that we laid in our population. And so I always use the example of how, you had all those cities competing for Amazon to put their second headquarters. Well, guess what? We got their first one organically. We didn't have to compete, cajole, convince, right? They came here, they started here because we had what it took to start a successful tech company, one of the most successful tech companies in the world, because of our the folks that are the way we've educated folks in our state. So that said, we need to now work with those tech partners to make sure those technological advances, those educational opportunities are expanded across our public. And I think it can be done. And I think it's a win-win for both the folks in private and in the public sector, but it goes beyond that, right? It's a necessity. So this pandemic has showed it's a necessity. Technology is no longer a luxury. Being skilled in the tech field in terms of just the basic skills that our kids have, what I like to call our digital natives, right? They are natively in tune to tech, and we have to expand that skill set to our entire population so that they aren't left out, so that they aren't left behind when things like a public health crisis happen. So I think there's a lot of conversations that we can have at the state level to partner with the private sector to getting the technology know-how into more hands.
Great. I want to just remind people that if you have questions of John and April, to put them into the chat box. And I keep looking here to see if there's questions. I haven't seen one on this one, unless Catherine, if there's some have come in on Facebook. Okay, so then let's move on to the next topic, which has been a dear one to me. And that has to do with transportation. And transportation, we can think about transportation in terms of, a month ago, we might have driven to Seattle fairly quickly. You could get down to Seattle from Lake Stevens in 45, 50 minutes, and maybe faster than that. The other day when I drove home from Seattle, it was 35 minutes. And I wondered what was going on. And well, it was just, there's a lot of people out there. And I think after we hopefully, and I think positively, get through COVID, our roads are going to be very congested. More so than before COVID-19. In 15 years, there's another 1 million people in this Puget Sound area, and in 30 years, there's another 2 million people living here. We are already behind on transportation. I'm setting this up for you guys. We're way, way behind in funding the right kind of transportation. And for those of you that are on here that live in Lake Stevens, you know only too well that it's going to be difficult to get from Lake Stevens to Everett, or you get to the transit stations and get to where you need to get. So with that, I think the challenge is out there, and I'd like to turn it back to you, John, if you don't mind, just to talk a little bit about what you see are the both the challenges and how we might address this problem. And quite frankly, has COVID-19 changed the nature of the problem?
What I will say is, thank you, Mayor, and you set it up quite well. I knew when we talked about the topic of transportation, I knew you were going to talk about the trestle. I knew you were going to talk about the projects in your city. I'll tell you what I've heard. I was on a phone conversation yesterday with the chairman of the House Transportation Committee, Jake Fye. And what he said is that the news is not good. I mean, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. He said the news is not good. Our transportation system is really hurting right now. We're not bringing, I'll say this again, Mayor, if you didn't hear it. I was on the phone yesterday with Chairman of the Transportation Committee, Jake Fye, and he said the news about our transportation is not good. He said projects are going to be delayed. We're just not raking in the dollars because people aren't driving as much. We're going to try and get a transportation package during the next session. But for right now, we just don't know what the answers are. I don't know. I haven't talked with Senator Hobbs yet. I know he's looking at a transportation package that will do something with Highway 2. And of course, we need to to build a trestle. When you and I started talking about it over several years ago, we were talking $1 billion. We're probably up to about $1.5 billion, $1.7 billion right now, not knowing what we're going to do. But things are not looking well right now. Every time I go to a city, whether it be your city, talk to your new mayor, or Lake Stevens, Marysville, whatever, they all say the same thing. They all say, don't cut my projects, or don't delay my projects, and we're trying not to. But at the same time, when people are running for office, and you know this yourself, Mayor Spencer, those candidates running are always talking about things that they want to cut. But they're sitting there as council members and as candidates saying, bring us these projects. It's not looking well. So I can't tell you what the answer is going to be. We think we're going to have a new a package this year. What it's going to look like, I just don't know. How we're going to fund it, I really don't know. I know that's not the answer you wanted to hear, but I can't tell you something that, and I know how hard you worked. I know you were there for the roundabout that we're getting. You were there for a lot of things in widening Highway 9, but for right now, I don't know what the answers are.
Money tree.
Yeah.
April, would you like to comment on our
Yeah, well, of course, because I'm a candidate. And so like Representative Lovick said, I'm like, hey, the world, it's the moon and nothing less. And so, but honestly, I think for me as a candidate, I do want to work hard for these transportation projects that I know are so necessary. But I do want to define for voters what work hard means, because I'm also a realist. And so Representative Lovick is spot on. Representative Fay had a open kind of town hall style meeting where he explained to folks in the community about the challenges with the transportation budget and the funding for a variety of reasons, right? We had a ballot measure pass and then a global pandemic. And so those just don't bode well for any budget. That said, my approach to this, to bringing home the bacon, if you will, for these projects is going to be a measured approach. And when I say measured, it means let's really start and stick with that design and engineering phase so that we can be ready when we're ready to apply for those federal matching dollars for these programs. We have to start, and we have to start somewhere. So if we can start with the really small dollar ticket items in that design and engineering phase, we will be ready when we do recover, because I am an absolute optimist. We're going to recover from this. And the way we're going to recover is through infrastructure. So we have to invest in ourselves, our people, and our communities. And that's through infrastructure projects that can get folks working. That said, they have to be designed. They have to be thought about and planned. And so if we can get there, if we can keep the ball moving, those projects will come to fruition. So that's a realistic view with a realistic plan to get it done. But again, there's no money tree. I wish there was, but I think there are some unique and unconventional revenue opportunities that we're going to have during this public health crisis and beyond to restructure things like our regressive tax code to get us there a little quicker.
Thank you.
And I'll just say this, Mayor, if you don't mind, I just want to say when we were in Olympia this last session, we took $456 million out of transportation projects. That's almost $500 million we had to take out of transportation projects this last session. And it was painful, I'm here to tell you. And we don't know what it's going to look like the next time. But I will say, we're going to need people like April. We're going to need people with courage to stand up and to do the right thing. And that's why I'm excited to have her. I'm excited to have her, I won't say as a running mate, but as a seat mate. That's quite exciting for me.
So I have a question here that I think is related to both education and transportation. And it starts out with a comment that clearly with COVID-19, the state budget is impacted or affected. And so the question is, what areas do you see where the budget should be cut or might be cut? Maybe turn it to you, John. You've been there in Olympia already, listening preparatory to next January, but some thoughts as to where the legislature is looking to reduce the budget.
So I really like what the governor called, the governor asked all of the agencies, the state agencies, to do a 15% cut. And just an example, the Department of Corrections, a 15% cut in the Department of Corrections resulted in $181 million in savings. Now, we're not going to take all of those, but I think we need to look at some of those the ideas like that. One thing we're not going to cut, and I've said this and I'll say it again, we're not going to damage our social fiber. We're not going to balance the budget on the backs of those who need it most. But also remember, Mayor Spencer and those on the call, you know, we have a pretty healthy reserve, and we're going to have to obviously get some help from members of the other side to tap into those reserves. So we're going to have some cuts. There's no question about it. We're going to have some cuts. We're going to have new revenue. And what I'm advocating that we just simply go after a wealth tax. I mean, a wealth tax, go after the Jeff Bezos and all of the multimillionaires and the billionaires, most of those who live in King County in the Seattle area. A wealth tax, we feel that we could do quite well if we go after a wealth tax, but we're not going to cut and balance this budget. And I'm not just saying this. I spoke with Ormsby, who's the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. The Speaker, Jenkins, has said the same thing. We're going to have some cuts, but it's not going to be done on the backs of those who need it most, on our social fiber.
Yeah, April, would you like to comment on? Then I have some more questions.
Absolutely. I am 100% in agreement with Representative Lovick on this one. And the way I talk about the current situation that we're in, this pandemic, this public health crisis, it's not just a recession, right? It's disaster. And so in a disaster, when you have a hurricane, do you go to that person who's just lost their home and say, you know, do you really need that new roof? Or what can we cut out of that kitchen cabinet? Do you need all that sugar? No, you say, how do I make you whole? How do I get you better than you were before? How do I help? And that's the mindset that we need to take into this next session. And we are going to have some cuts. And I say that, and not to be flippant about it, but I think we really have to focus on economic recovery. And it's back to that conversation about infrastructure and getting our economy stronger and working better. And so it's not about taxing. It's not about doing this on the backs of working families or small businesses. It is absolutely what Representative Lovick said, which is a wealth tax, which is taxing, having folks pay their fair share. There's a reason why companies like Amazon were started here, because we do have amazing schools and we have amazing air quality, and it's a gorgeous place to live. And that does cost money. And when you're in a situation, a disaster like this, and some folks are seeing their incomes actually rise during this disaster, and some are seeing it fall at a rate that we have not seen since the Great Depression. So when you have that happen, it doesn't seem untoward, or it doesn't seem like we're asking too much of the folks who are doing well amidst the hurricane to help the folks who aren't. And so I think that's the conversation we have to have in Olympia. And I think it's a conversation that you're going to see folks really embrace, and we're going to get there without having these wholesale austerity cuts that we did in 2008 and quite frankly did not work, that we're still recovering from right now.
So here's a question I think is a good follow-up to both of you. It's put this way: is it an option to incentivize businesses to continue to support teleworking beyond COVID-19 in order to help alleviate the transportation issue? In other words, rather than getting in your car to go to work, you get in front of your computer and work from home. Is there any thinking about incentivizing that?
I'll take that. I've not heard any thoughts on that other than listening to KUOW, which I listen to 24/7. I've heard those comments there, but it's something. What we're going to look at a lot of things, and I think your comment about incentivizing makes a lot of sense. But I've heard it from that aspect, but I haven't heard it from the leaders in Olympia that would possibly be in a position to make some of those decisions or to make some of those suggestions. But it's an interesting comment. I think we're going to open the door for a lot of things. Everything will be on the table.
April, this might or address the question also from a broadband basis.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for me, the question really hinges more on not so much incentivizing, but realizing it, right? So they're doing it. They're gonna do it. If you look at what Twitter, Square, Google, if you guys don't know it, we do have a big HBO contingency in Seattle. All those folks are telling their folks that you are going to work from home, right? And some might be indefinitely and have that option or opportunity, and some might not. But what I think we need to do as a state and even in our individual localities is realize that change and make the most of it. So if you think about some of the things that hinged around large buildings with a lot of employees and services that are around there, right? Dry cleaners, dog grooming, takeout. I mean, just all sorts of little niche businesses, right? So now how do we bring those into our community and recognize that economic growth for them? So I look at a community like Lake Stevens, which folks love to work there, but I know there's been challenges getting employers to go there and having employment opportunities in Lake Stevens. Well, now, guess what? You've got a lot of workforce in Lake Stevens. You've got a lot of Amazon in Lake Stevens. You've got a lot of Microsoft and Boeing in Lake Stevens. And so how do you as a community really capitalize on that, right? And how do you say, look, we love it. Great, Amazon. You've got maybe 200-300 employees here. How do we make this the space for Amazon that you're already here? You don't have to build something. You don't have to come to Lake Stevens. You're already here. And so I think as a state, we can look at policies. We can look at, just different ways to say, here's how you can say thank you to these employers that are now in your community with workforce. And they might choose to stay. And there might be some real economic opportunities for that. And just kind of a side note, I was talking to some folks in a community that's a neighboring community to the 44th, because there are some very large employers looking at having kind of these work pods available for their workforce there, right? So they've got involved with these really cool workspaces, and how can they have these work pods available to their employees? And so immediately I'm thinking about the 44th, right? I'm like, great, if that happens, then you might have more people moving out here because our communities are beautiful and lovely. And how can we really make that work out for us as a community, taking advantage of having maybe more employers really nearby? So I think there's just opportunity in this new workforce development in these little small clusters that we know of as our hometowns.
And I just want to say one last thing. I don't think we should give up the hope on getting some help from the federal government in the form of a stimulus package or some of those things. I think after November 3rd, I think it might be encouraging that some of those possibilities will happen to help with our budget issues.
April, thank you for your answer, because I think it went a long way to answering a question we had here. Is it an option to, will jobs in Lake Stevens help the transportation issue? Might more people be working from home? And I think the answer is yes. What I think I'm hearing is that people have discovered that they like working from home and they get a lot done that way. So let's move on. Let me take just a second here to see if there's other questions I may have missed. There was a question here, April, about, you mentioned progressive tax reform. You may have already touched on that in your answer, but the question here is, what did you mean about progressive tax reform?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So our tax code for Washington State, we are the most regressive tax code in the nation. And when I say regressive, it simply means that we are taxing the wrong people too much. So we are taxing working families far, far too much, more so than we are taxing the wealthy. And so that makes it regressive. And progressive, it doesn't mean that it's that it leans blue, right? Like, it just means that it is more progressive. It's going to actually tax folks based more on I don't want to say income, but I want to say it's going to tax them in a way that's more commensurate with what they're making. And so it would be a wealth tax, would be a progressive tax reform. So that's kind of where I'm going. There's also a lot of loopholes that corporations and wealthy folks take advantage of. And so closing some of those loopholes would be a part of progressive tax reform as well.
Okay,
Can I jump on that for just a second, Mayor?
Sure.
So in 2019, I was the acting Speaker of the House for 8 months. And I actually put together, based on legislation, a tax structure work group. And Senator Wagner, who's over in the 39th district, and Representative Noel Frame, who's down in the 36th district, they're co-chairs of this tax structure work group. They're looking at our tax structure tax structure that has not been examined for 70 years. And they're going to come back in a bipartisan way and tell us some of the things that we need to change in our tax structure. And those are some of the things I believe April is talking about. Our tax structure is just one that we have to have legislation to say, look at the structure that we have in place that we have not examined. And a lot of people, this bipartisan group, it's a lot of wonderful people that will make some recommendations as to what our structure, what are some of those things that we need to maybe remove from the structure? I mean, from our taxes, from our code. So that's one of the things that I know we're doing.
Okay, thank you. I want to go back to a question here that goes back to the education. And the question was, are there any thoughts on when we'll be able to get SAT testing opportunities going again in the schools? And is that being discussed separate from the schools reopening, or is it just a totally separate issue for us here this evening?
Yeah, so I love education questions. So unfortunately, it is a separate issue, but I'm going to answer it anyway. So the SAT is separate from the school districts in that it's administered by the College Board, but it is administered mostly on school district campuses. It's just 100% a safety thing because we can't have kids in classrooms taking any types of tests. We can't open up our rooms to the College Board. That said, the SAT is not a great indicator of college success, and it's incredibly inequitable. And so we have a lot of colleges that you guys would have heard of and know and love, rethinking their reliance on things like high stakes tests like the SAT. That's really, really good news, I think, for all of our kids, no matter where they come from, what income level, what race. It's great news because high stakes tests just are not a great indicator of success. So because of the public health crisis, folks at colleges all across the nation are rethinking that. As a result, the College Board is feeling less pressure to get kiddos in the classroom to take those tests. And I think that we're going to have a lot of good data from this last graduating class and more than likely this current graduating class who won't have access to those tests. So they won't be taken into account in terms of college admission. And then we'll be able to track their success. And if there were other better metrics used to determine that success over the next 4 years. So probably a super long-winded answer to a great, great question. We won't get them back in our classroom soon to take those tests, but it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Can I just say this, Mayor, real quick? April is going to absolutely love working with Representative Sharon Tomiko Santos. She chairs the House Education Committee. I've heard that comment from her so many times. I've sat in caucus and heard her say almost word for word. So thank you, April. It's just so exciting to hear your voice and to hear the voice of members of our House Education Committee. I just had to say.
I'm excited. Thank you.
I have a question from Lloydine Chapman, and unfortunately, the typing of it didn't come through. So Lloydine, if you don't mind sending your question in again on the chat room, that would be great. Thank you. On the chat space, I should say. So with that, let's move on to the next subject, and then keep in mind we're going to keep this open for any kind of question you might have. And as Catherine said, if we don't get through them all, they'll have answers on their Facebook pages and their websites. So the next topic is housing, which is an incredibly broad topic. I think what we want to do here this evening is talk a little bit more about the difficulty that a lot of people are having either finding housing or have, because of COVID-19, lost a job and are having difficulties making the payments or staying in their homes. And I think overall, the whole issue of affordable housing and how is it as we go into the future here that we're going to be able to see that there's affordable housing for this large population moving into our community. I just want to relate a piece of information that I learned when I was actually way back, I was a city council member, and that is that in our own city of Lake Stevens, the groups of people who are having the greatest struggle finding affordable housing in Lake Stevens are our teachers, our firemen and policemen, and school teachers. Now, those are fundamental jobs that keep a community going, and yet they're struggling to find places to live. Obviously, the entry-level folks are having the greatest struggle. So with that very broad description of the housing topic, let me turn it to April and ask if you would share some of your thoughts on the dimensions of this problem and where you think what the legislature can address to help out.
Yeah, Mayor Spencer, I'm glad you put it the way you put it, because what you defined right there was the missing middle. So when I talk about housing and I talk about growth, because of course that intersection is, you have to talk about them together, it's the missing middle that's really getting the brunt of it. So when we look at housing, we've got market rate housing, we've got low income housing, and both of those are talked about often, but that missing middle is that piece where it's not quite market, but it's not low income, right? So I call it workforce housing is a better definition, and workforce means entry-level nurses, entry-level teachers, entry-level firefighters. They just can't afford market rate housing. And so we have to be conscious of that, and we have to have housing solutions that address it. One of the best, and I think most popular right now housing solution for that is doing housing at transportation hubs. And so you've got multi-level housing with mixed use at the bottom. So it becomes almost like a little community hub. You're close to transportation, and you're able to accommodate a variety of incomes to make the project pencil out on paper. And I'll tell you, it's one of the reasons I talk passionately about housing. The master builders actually gave me a dual endorsement. And as a Democratic candidate, for those of you guys who play inside baseball with this stuff, they never do that, right? So they were like, and they told me that, they go, April, we never do that. But I am passionate about housing for all. So I am a housing first candidate. So until you deal with housing, you can't deal with substance abuse, mental health, education, employment. You've got to be well housed. But I think to your point, Mayor Spencer, that missing middle is really something that we need to talk about more, because if we can make solutions for workforce housing, getting more folks housed, you will start to see an impact on homelessness. It's far easier to keep someone housed than to get them housed out of homelessness. So we really have to make a concerted effort at the state level, but also our localities, to make sure folks have access to affordable housing and that they keep it. And that's especially necessary during this public health crisis.
And I'll just,
answer, I have to, excuse me, John, I'll throw another dimension. It's your answer sounds like we're going to have to deal with the zoning and land use decision that's being made by local communities around these transit hubs, or quite frankly, in communities like Lake Stevens. So with that, John, I'll turn it back to you.
I was actually going to talk about some of the zoning decisions, but since you've already touched on it, and April touched on something else that I wanted to talk about, she talked about transportation hubs. What I will say is that the legislature put $400 million into the Housing Trust Fund in 2019. And I'm already hearing conversations from the former Speaker of the House and his seatmate, Nicole Macri. We're going to increase that. We're probably going to end up doubling that amount in the Housing Trust Fund. I would love to see it over probably $600–700 million. We know the legislature needs to, we need to do some of those things. I just wanted to talk about some of the other things that I know we did. We passed legislation this last session to protect renters from unfair landlords. We need to make sure that we continue some of those things. But what April said is actually the direction we need to go in. And it's, again, COVID hasn't made things any easier for us, but we don't get elected because it's an easy job. We get elected because it's a tough job and we have to make tough decisions.
Okay, thank you. Let me take a quick look at questions here. There's one here, back to Lloydine Chapman's question, is she doesn't want a Pollyanna rhetoric answer to this. How do we bridge and heal the gap between what is being called the radical left and the extreme far right? How will your leadership aid in bringing Americans together? So I'm going to turn to you, John.
I would like to take that one, if you don't mind. And this is not going to be, whatever the word is, Pollyannish. You know, we're dealing with a global pandemic, social unrest, economic uncertainty. And on top of that, we had the worst wildfire season, I think, ever. The last thing we need right now is division. And that's what we have right now. We are just absolutely divided. And as tough of a subject as it is to talk about, we're divided. We're beginning to become divided down racial lines. That's where leadership is needed. I tell everybody, and she might not like this answer, this election is about leadership. It's about results. We need leaders to guide us through this global pandemic, to embrace unity, diversity, and strength, and realize that power, we can exercise power, but we have to be prudent with our power. And we need leaders to help heal our racial divide. I believe that I can do that. I believe that April can do that, because we have experienced things that a lot of people have not experienced. That's why we're sitting here on this conversation tonight, and we could be doing other things. That's not Pollyannish. We're going to have to stand up. We're going to have a lot of people be willing to speak up and speak out. I heard John Meacham say this the other day on the radio, on TV. He said he didn't know where he would have been during the 50s and 60s, but he said he knows where he is now. He is speaking up and speaking out. So that's where I think we need to be. That is what is going to make a difference. Thank you, Mayor. And thanks for the question.
Yeah, April?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. It's a great one. And so Pollyannish, you know, it's being overly optimistic, right? Like that's just the dictionary definition of it. And so, and I have been accused of that before. And I'll tell you, sometimes I have to lean in because it is a hard time that we're in right now, and we have a lot of healing to do. But I look at my family as kind of indicator that we can get there, right? So I've got this big, beautiful blended family, right? All colors of the rainbow. And they are the 44th, right? I've been here 23 years. I've raised 6 kiddos in the Snohomish County. And it's just awesome that they can be here living their lives in college, out of college, in high school. And they are the future. And that's what's going to bridge the divide, right? And their generations having none of it. They are like, look, we love each other. We get along. We're moving forward. The sky's the limit. It's just amazing. And so I think for me, I'm bridging that divide with my optimism, with my, you know, how I'm teaching my kids to love one another. And then also to John, Representative Lovick's point, right? With our service, like we're here serving, and the fact that you can have the two of us representing the 44th at this moment in history says that we've come a long way. But it's our diverse experience, right, that gets us here. So I know John's had just the most amazing experiences in his life that have brought him to this point. And I think for me, one of the ones I talk to folks a lot about is I was the first African-American student body president of Oregon State University. And if you know Oregon State University, it's Corvallis, Oregon, right? I was like the 4th woman. They'd only had women elected during wars, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, you know, and then me. And I had these, you know, dreadlocks, and I was running on a campus that was predominantly white. And when I say predominantly white, it was 200 Black students, and 50 of us weren't in Division I athletics. So it was an uphill battle, but I was, you know, overly optimistic, and I knew that I had a message of positivity and change, and it resonated with those students on that campus, and with some folks it didn't, but I was able to win that election and make a positive change there, and that kind of got me started on helping in my community no matter what. What I love about the 44th is that now my community looks more like me, right? Like my family and like my kiddos. So I think it's going to be easier to bridge that gap. And I'm looking forward to serving everybody in the community to get us all there.
Mayor, I have to get one more word in. 6 words that I think we should all write down. And I just absolutely love listening to April. The 6 words are, you stand for what you tolerate. You stand for what you tolerate. I just have to say this. I was over at the Looking Glass in Snohomish today. I was standing there in a little restaurant, packed, standing there with my drink with another lady because she met me to talk about some issues, and 2 young students. And to underscore what April said, 2 young students saw us standing there. They looked over at us and said, would you guys like our seats? They stood up. Now, when is that going to happen? When would that have happened before? They stood up and I said, no. She said, no, you guys take our seats. They stood and finished their drinks while we sat down at a little table in the place. This is what's going to make a difference. People are beginning to stand up, and speak out. I love the question. I would love to have us have a session like this when we're seatmates, April. I would love to have us do this on a regular basis. So thank the person for the question, please. It was a wonderful question. Thank you.
I have another.
Be excited.
Going back to education, and the question is pretty straightforward. Do you expect cuts to the early learning centers, and what can be done to expand access to these early learning services?
So we might have some, but hopefully not. I was on the I serve on the Human Services and Early Learning Committee, and when I talked to Representative Tana Sen, and we chatted actually today. Those are the things that we're going to have to, all of us are going to be in there fighting to make sure that we don't have these cuts. And I'm going to be fighting as hard as anybody else. One of the things you get, and April will learn this when she's in the legislature, you can't always pass everything. It's impossible to pass everything you want, but you are always in a position to stop things from happening by speaking up, speaking out, and going into caucus and speaking up. So we might have some minor cuts, but I don't think they're going to be to the extent. I'm an optimist. If you look real quick, if you look and you saw what our revenue forecast was, we're expecting another positive revenue forecast so that when we arrive in Olympia, we think we're going to be in not the best shape, but we think we're going to be in pretty good shape, listening to the governor and different people on these different groups. So yes, we might have some, but I don't think they're going to be to the extent that's going to be devastating.
Let me go to another question, and it's been partly answered on the chat room, but I think the subject is important for both of you to address. And this person says that they're worried about people suffering from addiction and mental health issues. She noted that the former sheriff had a program called the Office of Neighborhoods online. The answer was given that the Office of Neighborhoods is still going strong. But I'd like you to address the ongoing issue in our communities and across our state. Doesn't matter whether it's urban or rural or whatever, of addiction and also mental health. April, could you address some of your thoughts on what the state might do or look hard at doing to address those issues?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from my standpoint, things like the Office of Neighborhoods, it needs to be enhanced, right? Because they pay dividends down the long run. When we get folks the help they need when they need it, that's going to be a far better deal, if you will, like for the state than it would be to wait until they're in absolute crisis. So I think from my standpoint, I'll be advocating, just like John said, in caucus, saying, look, these are things that we need to support, especially during this public health crisis. I'll tell you at the school level, it's going to be a tsunami when we get back to school with some of the mental health issues and quite frankly, substance abuse issues that we're going to have to deal with in our classrooms and in our corridors. We need things like the Office of Neighborhoods to be that safety net now before we get there. And, again, the same goes to that previous question to early learning and any potential cuts. The way as districts we're trying to couch that is we can't do it because we're going to have gaps in learning. We're already seeing it. People are taking a gap with kindergarten year, not putting their kindergartners in to stay in early learning because of COVID, or they're going to, skip it all together. So if we make cuts to those early learning programs, we're going to see third graders and fifth graders not at grade level because they weren't given the foundational support that they needed early on. And by the way, there's a pandemic. So for me, it's all about, having that safety net there and really meeting people where they're at, not waiting until they're in crisis to get them the help they need.
So I'll just say briefly, one of the bills that I passed 2 years ago was a bill to create a mental health field response teams so that we can send these response teams out instead of police officers. I'm on a group called the Council of State Legislators, And this is something that we're looking at throughout the country because we were locking people up for things that we should not have. Also legislation that will give us alternatives to arrest. You know, unfortunately, people will still have, addiction will still be there, but do we need to lock people up for those things? And the answer is no. What we need to do is to put more money into those. And unfortunately, COVID impacted a lot of those things that we wanted to do, but it's still legislation, it's still the law, and all we need to do at some point when we get in a position to fund them better, it will make a difference in communities.
Thank you. I have to take the bully pulpit for a moment, and that is, April, if you can do anything to make sure that early learning can be funded and expanded. The data is too strong across this nation that if children get the proper education from birth until 3rd grade, they will do so much better in all life arenas. And if we as a society don't learn that and start funding that, we're still going to be dealing with the same problems social problems we deal with today. That's my soapbox, I guess you call it.
Yep, I agree 100%.
Yeah, we're just about out of time. I didn't see any additional questions. Catherine, are there any others that I need to pick up here in the chat room? Okay.
Mayor, can I touch on your last comment with
Sure.
About 30 seconds, if I can?
Yeah.
So I was attending a conference last year in Nashville, Tennessee, and I happened to drift into a room, and it was the governor of Illinois, and his picture, I can't remember how you pronounce his name. And he talked about the fact that they turned their economy around. He said when he became governor of that state, they turned the economy around, and they turned it around through early learning. They had Democrats, Republicans, independents. They realized that it's early learning that's making the big difference. And we were prepared. That's why I'm on the Early Learning and Human Services Committee. There are some committees that would be, oh my goodness, it would be wonderful to be on them. But that's where the action is. That's what we're talking about. I'm on that committee. April, I hope you don't want to serve because they will only let one member per district serve. But Early Learning and Human Services, early learning is where, and you said it well, Mayor. Thanks for setting that up. You're spot on.
So I'm going to have us wrap. I'm going to ask a question here that we might as well talk about. Several weeks ago and several months ago, the idea of unfunding our police departments was talked about a lot. I haven't seen it in the news too much lately, but I'd like each of you to address your thoughts on this phrase and what it means and where we need to go on, if at all, defunding police departments.
I will go first.
That you might.
Mayor, I will go first. And I tell people I spent almost 4 decades in law enforcement. And when people look at me, what I say is this: I'm Black, I'm brown, and I'm blue. I was born Black, my skin tone is brown, but I wore a blue uniform for 31 years and I was the county sheriff. I don't even have the conversation. We need to reimagine policing. We probably need to do some things. We will be doing some things, serving on a policing policy leadership team. We are looking at a lot of things like banning chokeholds, no-knock warrants, and a lot of those things. But we need our police officers. Just like April would probably tell you, if we had a teacher get in trouble, do something bad, we're not going to talk about defunding teachers. So no, we're not going to defund. We're going to reimagine law enforcement. And that's what I want us to do.
April?
And I agree 100%. And I have talked a lot about reimagining policing in this time. I do not believe, never have believed in defunding the police. And I see in the chat, there's my conversation with my baby brother. It's painful for me to say my baby brother, who's a 20-year police officer on the Washington, D.C. Metro Force. So we are a law enforcement family. And we had a great conversation about reimagining law enforcement with some awesome ideas about what he's doing in the force. He actually is in charge of training. And it's beautiful. And I think those are the conversations we need to have. I think those are the conversations people are having at their kitchen tables. It's really sad that, some folks have kind of gotten pigeonholed, candidates like John and I, for a variety of reasons into, well, you must be for defunding the police, when it's just, it couldn't be further from the truth. But what I will say is we do need to reimagine and rethink how we do things. And we should be doing that all the time anyway, about education, about policing, about how we serve mental health crises in our community, about what we're doing with our homeless populations. We should always be rethinking and reimagining so that we can be better as a society. But thank you for bringing that up, Mayor Spencer, because I think those are things that people think about and they don't sometimes ask us, right? They don't necessarily want to ask us. And I'm happy that you did ask that question, because I love talking about it.
And I have to say this, Mayor, you can't get away with that one on me. The policing policy leadership team that we're working on is about community relations and accountability. And what I tell people all the time, and I've even had people say it can't happen, I ask people to imagine, what is law enforcement going to look like when there is no bias in the system? What is law enforcement going to look like? That's what we're trying to do, an evolution of policing, but not defunding. Great time, a great ending, a great question. Thank you.
With that, I think I will turn it back to Catherine. We promised 1 hour, and I think we're at 61 minutes. So Catherine.
You did a great job.
Yeah, well, I know that we really just scraped the surface of a lot of these issues. So again, I just want to reiterate that Representative Lovick's and April's virtual doors are always open, and I will right at this moment copy and paste their emails into the chat. And so I really encourage you to reach out to them anytime. Encourage your friends and family to reach out to them anytime. And I also just want to remind everyone about April's kitchen conversation series, which has been going on since the primary, which feels like so long ago now. But she's had a large amount of elected officials, community leaders, students come on to talk about topics ranging from having her brother on to talk about what it means to be a Black police officer in Washington, D.C. in 2020, to reopening our schools, to the impact of labor unions in our district. So all of her previous kitchen conversations are on her YouTube page, which I'll also throw in the chat at this moment. It makes you think, what would we be doing if this wasn't virtual? Because there would be no chat. I would just be spelling out April's YouTube page on a stage or something. And I also really just want to highlight that both the Berg and Lovick campaigns are always welcoming new volunteers to the team, and would love to see some new faces on our phone banks. And so if you're interested in getting involved, you can head to aprilberg.com and click on our volunteer page, and that has our list of phone banking opportunities. And to get involved with Representative Lovick's campaign, you can text phone bank to Representative Lovick's campaign manager, Sam, and I will copy and paste his number in the chat as well. That's 360-628-0825. So yeah, and also the Berg and Lovick teams will also start joint sign waving this weekend, which is super exciting. We've kind of decided to join forces in these final now 19 days leading up to the election. So if you head to April's website and click that volunteer tab, the sign up sheet is already on her website. So there are a ton of different times. Representative Lovick's campaign is very bold in the fact that they're sign waving at 6 a.m. Many mornings starting next week. So I admire that, but there are also later times that y'all can pick to sign up. So I just want to thank everyone so much for coming, and reiterate that this is really just, these conversations are too short. So they scrape the surface, but they're just the beginning of many, many conversations about important issues. So thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you all have a restful but politically active next 19 days.
Yes,
you.
and thank
very
you,
much.
John Spencer.
you.
Thank you, Mayor Spencer, and
Thank you.
great to see you, Representative Lovick. Bye,
Bet.
everyone. Thank you.